agenda, no takes, and no rules. Social Sessions with Mike Gannotti. And we are back with another Social Sessions, and this is part two of two with Alfred
Part
Ojukwu.
deux in French, we say part deux.
Part deux.
Canadian.
Do you speak French?
Oui, je parle français, hein.
Je n'ai pas.
Je parle pas.
That's all I can say. Je n'ai pas français.
Je ne parle pas.
um, I took it in seventh grade. I was not a good
Oh
student.
my goodness, seventh grade doesn't count. It has to be at least high school. And
I will. I will say. Wait a minute. So did you take it in high school, French?
I took high school and college.
High school and college. Wow.
Yeah,
Very cool. Any
yeah.
particular reason?
Because I thought it would be something challenging to do. I did it at the Middlebury School of College, Middlebury College, for a summer intensive, and then ever since then it's just been a passion of mine. Just, you know.
Have you gone where you have the opportunity to speak French?
No, not really.
Well,
Just
you
I've had
got it.
friends. I believe you. Yeah. Obviously, I'm not as traveled as you are. I'm working on that. That's one of the things I'm working on. I'll
Good.
get
Good.
there.
You need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I spent a bunch of time in France the last several years, and it's funny because as long as you can do enough to order food and make the effort, the people were super gracious. So I always heard about the French when you go over there. Oh, they don't like it and they don't like travelers and stuff. And I found every time if you made, I just know a little bit, and just enough to be able to ask a question or order something. And then they'd say, "Do you speak English?" It's no problem. And then they were like just great. So it was awesome.
Yeah, they usually adjust for you. So I think better off to just go ahead and speak English than to try to speak French all the time. So it just depends.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
interesting.
so it was awesome. So here we are. This is part two. Enough of the French. We're gonna be talking English today. And last week we talked, about devices, and you were sharing, and we had some pretty exciting news. I know this the other day internally. Um, I don't want to give away numbers and stuff, but we saw that devices, in fact, huge interest evidently this last year from customers.
Yeah, I think it's been huge because of the work from home scenario, making sure you have devices to, be able to get connected while you're at home, and that's been, we've seen both frontline workers or people needed in the hospitals
Mhm.
working, with their patients, and also just working from home. And some industries really have reduced staff, so in
Yeah.
those industries, there wasn't necessarily an interest for devices, but it just depends. Um, it just depends on the scenario. So,
So, it's interesting when we talk about the work from home and devices. I was just thinking about this that we're oftentimes right now, a lot of us have been very isolated from others. And
hmm
that means you're only getting, input more infrequently via channels like we're in now in Teams, but you get it more, a lot of that real personal input you get from your family and friends as you're doing social interactions and other things. But I think it was a little over a week ago, you gave a presentation internally on personal board of directors and about creating this intentional environment where and I'm going to let you go through it all, but this intentional piece where it's really I think of the iron and steel, right? We sharpen and we become we sharpen our edges. We become a better person by the input and sometimes the friction that's created through healthy, honest interactions. But you
yeah.
have a whole approach to it that I just found fascinating.
Well,
So
I think every time you say personal board of directors, I kind of perk up because even just hearing those words is really the first step in figuring out uh, what is it that I want to do, right? And really the challenge I have with each and every individual that takes this journey is to
Hmm.
figure out who, where are you? Where do you
Yep.
want to go? How do you
Yep.
want to get there? But most importantly, who's going to help you get there? Because here's the thing, you can't do it by yourself, right? Everyone believes that you can actually get out there and just figure all these things out. But you've got people, you got to surround yourself with people that really are going to help you figure it out. So the session I did was around it was again, it was around finding the environment that helps you succeed the most. That's
Right.
what I loved about it. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yeah,
So
and it's positive growth. I mean, it just for me the approach that you took being very intentional about that and proactive. I thought it was phenomenal. And although it's not tech, it certainly applies to everybody who's working in our field in technology, healthcare, life sciences, and in just in life in general, I think.
yeah, and I think the words "be intentional" is probably for every time you say that. Be intentional is the first
Yeah.
thing that I think of, mainly because it reminds me that it's not just an idea, it's not just a suggestion, it's
Hmm.
an action that you have to do. It's an
Yeah.
action that you have to take. It's a process that you have to uh, uh, adopt, right?
Hmm.
And so what I did with the team, and I'm going to share this out with you so you can see where I'm coming from. What I did with the team, which was amazing, was we basically spent some time understanding what it was that what it meant to be to have a board of directors. So I'm gonna just show it to you real quick here. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yeah.
So, and this is kind of what I walked the team through because I wanted to make sure that they understood where I was coming from. So, if you were to define the word board of directors, how would you define it, Mike? Like the personal board of directors, how would you define it?
The people that get, I mean, I think of a board of directors of the group who they give input and feedback and set the direction, help to set the direction, tone, and things of a company, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the CEO goes to get their advice. And so, in personal life, I think it'd be something similar. And it's a group of individuals who, they meet regularly to talk about where you go, what's happening, where you going, and what do you need to do.
No, I think you're right on, and that's what I did is I basically helped them define it. So by definition, a board of directors is a board of elected or appointed members who jointly oversee the activities of a company. So if you
Yep.
think about Microsoft and the number of people they have on their board of directors, those people are instrumental to making that change. And so when we take that same concept from that corporation or that company or that entity and we apply it to an individual, that's when we start to see the power of what a board of directors does. So in this case, not only are you the company, but you're also the chairman of the board, and it's up to you to handpick each board member according to your needs. So what I did with the team and what I thought was so important is to really force people to step outside of their comfort zone,
Hmm.
right? To really think about what it means to have a personal board of directors. And it's not as simple as it looks, right? I think you've gone through this with me before. But the one thing that really resonates and will always resonate is it's about that individual. It's about you. So,
Yeah.
you and I spoke about this to some degree. So, if you were to describe you as a brand, let's talk about just Mike for a second. We'll take off the screen, but this is an example that I asked you as well. Let's share with us a little bit when you think about who Mike is, Michael Gannotti. What are the things that you do to build that brand?
Yeah, and I mean, in my building a brand, I've been, and I certainly haven't taken this approach, which we're going to get into, but what I've done is try to reach out, network, and connect with folks, um, not only internally but externally in social media and other things, and to foster ongoing points of contact that there's a confluence between actually physically meeting and then the virtual sessions and virtual interactions that we conduct and discuss and have talks around, et cetera. so that it's an ongoing process.
But from a branding perspective, from an individual personal branding perspective, I guess is I'm curious from your standpoint, right? So if we
Yeah.
were to talk about Mike's brand,
Yep.
what are the things that you do, just high level, right?
Yeah.
How would you describe the things that you've done in terms of branding for Mike himself?
Yeah. So for branding for Mike, I mean, I do active communications around technology, my
Mm-hmm.
stand, what I feel about things, tips and
Right.
tricks to establish myself as, hey, I'm a voice of some expertise in the
Right.
fields in which I cover, and to make that information as broadly available as possible to connect with others.
And that's important, right? So where I'm getting at with this is, when we think about our brand, it's about you. It's about driving who you are, your successes,
Yep.
your failures, and being able to partner with folks so that they can help you grow, help you develop, help you thrive, and help you just survive. So just think about it from the standpoint is you are who you are, you're doing really well, and what is it going to take you to that next level, right?
Hmm.
How do you get yourself to climb that ladder? Because everyone thinks, oh, it's just easy enough. I'm just going to go up the ladder and life's going to go great. So what I also talk about is just when we think about what in hindsight what people should have known, and we saw some of these stats a few years back where you have 43% of people that think that it's important to have effective communication, asking questions, asking for feedback, being part of the conversation. People feel that that's an important part. So
Yep.
that they when they move on to different roles or they're being evaluated on what they should have done, they think that is actually very important. Another 71% actually believe that it's important to have some sort of social networking and just to be able to network effectively. So that's
Hmm.
things like using LinkedIn to make the connections, reaching out to people that you've worked with in the past. They didn't realize how important these things were. 35% people perform well. Felt that performing well and producing results was important. Again, I think that's a no-brainer for most of us, but that's still important. We see that 26% plan, felt that they wish they'd known that it was important to plan and make their goals and careers in advance so they know where they're going and how they're going. Finding coaches, mentors,
Hmm.
advisors, all these things become a part of that challenge as well. And lastly, just making sure you know what's going on with the organization itself that you're a part of. Because a lot of times you get into the organization and you don't realize that you should have known this individual, you should have spoken to that person, you should have had 2 years of experience in this area, and that becomes part of your decision making process itself. So, I think it's important to know where you're starting from, to know where you're going, just to better understand how you get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's something we don't pay enough attention to, right? We just think
Yeah.
if we're doing the 35% perform well, produce results, that things are going to fall, into place, and that's not always the case.
Yeah, no, agreed. And so the other thing we did was we broke it down into different sections. I thought this was probably one of the pieces that helped me sort of
Hmm.
put some context into what it means to have a personal board of directors. And there's different levels to it. I call it levels of exposure, levels
Yep.
of learning. So, what I did with the team is we talked about the different levels. You started with the coach, right? So if you think back in your years of growing, a coach himself would be somebody that would be considered an individual that provided you knowledge about a specific sport
Hmm.
or program or event, helped you train to be better, essentially instructed you. I think back to my high school and college years. My wrestling coach was probably, growing up, one of the very first people that helped me sort of decide that if I was going to be successful, it was going to be up to me, and it was going to be
Yep.
me that does it. And they essentially trained me and educated me and pushed me to get there. So coaches are a great starting point for these sort of scenarios, you know?
Yeah, and what I love with this list as we're looking at it, um, and I was thinking of this the other day. A lot of times when we think of really how do we help to
Mhm.
better ourselves, improve, set up our career and stuff, we often stop at either coach or mentor. but really that's kind of where it begins and ends for a lot of folks, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this is
Yeah.
there's just much more, and so much more you get, right, from the other levels.
Exactly. So, but that's where you see the graduation happening, because then you go down to something like a mentor. A mentor, again, would be somebody that's essentially acting as a support vector,
Yep.
helping you figure out how to get things done. Like we did a lot of work with the Boys and Girls Club, right? So there'd be a senior individual that was working with a high school student or even a college student to make sure that they did what they needed to do to be successful. So mentors are essentially sort of the graduation approach of what a coach would be, which is they're there to support you, lead you, and direct you and give you ideas. In the corporate world or in the business world, you get into idea of having what we consider a sponsor. Now, what would you say a sponsor would be?
Oh, I guess I think of it may or may not be this individual, but I think of like my present manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
But somebody, when you talk about promotes and advocates, there's somebody that makes sure that people are aware of what you're doing. They
Mm-hmm.
promote the activities and stretch assignments and things that you're doing to their peers and to their management,
Mm-hmm.
and are willing to reach out even when you're looking at other career opportunities and say, hey, this person's thinking of this. If there's where they'll make those connections, they'll reach out, and they're instead of just talking to you and giving you advice like a mentor, there's somebody that proactively will reach out and do things on your behalf to try to move your career, your what you're doing forward.
Right, exactly. So it's now no longer that they're coaching you, but they're also promoting you. They're
Yeah.
basically, I call it being your hype man. So I'm a big hip hop fan. Jay-Z had a hype man. He had somebody that would come out there and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jay-Z," and and he would just basically give him sort of that introduction, if you want, into really just exploding who he was as an individual. We all need a sponsor. We all need
Yeah.
someone that is willing to come in there and tell that story on your behalf and really promote you and advocate for you. So sponsors come in to really, really play that role. The advisor role is, again, kind of goes into what you mentioned, which is maybe potentially the manager, but somebody that is really thinking about how do I get you into where you need to
Hmm.
go. Advises you in a way that gives you guidance. It gives
Hmm.
you professional counseling, and really just gives you an opportunity to make that next decision. We all should have some sort of advisor, right? So that comes into play as well. And the last one you have is the board of directors. Board of directors, everyone, when you start kind of graduating and seeing the difference, what you get to is this board of directors, which is essentially a number of individuals that oversee or manage your opportunity, that build out, who you are, what you want to do, and how it works. So I think that's amazing. I think that's where we started, and that comparison gives you sort of insight as to what you need to do to really help you get up that ladder. That's the
Yep.
important piece. So this piece is also important. I think this is interesting because what we tend to do is we look at the different individuals that would be make up. So let me pause there for a second, right? So we talk about an individual that is part of your board of directors. We have a number of different roles that we could potentially play, correct? So one of those being a clarifier, one of them being a challenger, one of them being connector. So curious from your standpoint, who would, if you were to identify somebody as a clarifier, who in your inner circle would you identify as that individual? We'll start there.
Um, in my personal life, I guess it used to be my dad, but
Mm.
now it'd be my wife.
Yeah, it's interesting that you went there first, and I love that you did that. So here, let's think about this, and this is a question I get quite a bit.
Yep.
Um, can family members be part of your personal board of directors?
And so I know we had a lot of discussion on the internal part about that, and I kept my mouth shut. I wanted to sit back and just listen.
Hmm.
Uh, I would say if you're really talking about an intentional board of directors, especially as related to your career, I would say no, in my opinion. That's my opinion. I
Yeah.
think that's who I have right now for my clarifier, but I
Hmm.
think when you're talking about career-wise, if you're being intentional and you're selecting people to affect the career, you already have those family and spouses as a natural part of your interaction,
Yep.
and they're going to interact with you and provide input, and and the board may say all of this and this, and then Mrs. G may say, and the judge has spoken, and I will,
Exactly.
right?
So,
But
so you,
it's got to be outside, I think.
it's definitely got to be outside, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Family members are not going anywhere. They are members for life. So we typically say yes, they're already default members, because when you get home, guess who's going to be telling you to, you know, like that's really what you're dealing with. So family members, it just depends, right? So I used to be a consultant, so using the word "it depends" comes up quite a bit. But family members, we typically say, are considered um, uh, pseudo members of your board of directors. So when we talk about thinking about how to get my board of directors involved, we typically are referring to people that you may or may not constantly have contact with.
Hmm.
People that think differently from you, people that will help you think outside the box. So a clarifier, for example, would be somebody who helps you sort of think through what you're trying to do, maybe challenges you in the way you're thinking about it, and maybe encourages you to step outside of your comfort zone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And then we see the connector, somebody who leads you to other people. So I kind of told this story, which I thought was amazing. I had a friend of mine. Uh, it was quite interesting because every time I went to an event, I'd go to an event. Good friend of mine, Elliot, and he would within less than a minute, 2 minutes.
Hmm.
Hey, Alfred, this is so and so, Tom. I work with him and so, and and I wanted to have a conversation with Elliot, but before I know it, Elliot introduced me to 3 or 4 people. Now, these people weren't just anybody. These people were important to him. They were
Yep.
important to his career. He knew that they made a difference. So that connector, his connector ability, really helped me to sort of grow my brand and to really drive uh, the knowledge of who I was and what I provided. So that connector role comes in really well. So you have to kind of think outside and ask yourself who would fit into that category.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And certainly I know in my own career I've had different at different times, different people who've been exactly like you said, that those connectors. And I didn't necessarily seek out again the formal board of directors, but definitely having some people like that's been extremely important.
Right. And so let's think about the challenger. If you were an identified challenger, I think of a challenger, and I've had people share different scenarios around what a challenger is. But a challenger again would be somebody who helps you act boldly. So if you think back in your career, who would you, outside of your family, who would you consider to be a challenger you know, in your career? And again, for those of you listening, I would love
Yeah.
for you to do the same thing on your own because it helps you sort of find those people as well.
So I think like when I think about like my own career, somebody who's really um, well, there's been a couple of people. I'm going to go back. This is further than I thought of last time, but back in my old job when I was corporate architect before Microsoft days for a very large financial services company. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not going to say his name, but the master architect at the time of the organization um, approached me, and I was working on the usability team. And he said after some meetings, he said, I want you to come work for me as corporate systems architect. You'll be in charge of back end systems. And I looked at him and said, what are you smoking? I said, my degree is elementary ed. I'm not an architect. And he said, no, the stuff that you're doing. And he saw like potential. And then what he said was, look, and he did this continually in my job.
Hmm.
He said, my job here is to set you loose, set you free to do what you're capable of doing.
Right.
My only thing I ask is that you do it. And he kept putting challenges in front of me. Don't take the status quo. This is how we do things, slow and laboriously. How can you
Hmm.
break out and innovate and do things different? And was a great person for I'd get frustrated. Okay, well, how can you turn this around? What can you do different?
Right.
Um,
So that individual basically kind of pushed you a little bit further than you were willing to go, right?
oh yeah, really
And
got me stretching, which
and
got
I
me here, by the way, I'll just say.
a great example, right? So that's what here's
Yeah,
this idea that we can climb these ladders by ourselves, but then sometimes it's better to have somebody come up and help us figure out how to climb that
yeah,
ladder. And a challenger would be somebody that does that. The
yeah,
other one I have on here, which I think is interesting, is as well is the industry expert. So we talk about an
yeah,
expert in that space that knows how the technology works, that understands what's needed for the success of that product or that
yeah.
solution, um, who brings the wisdom, right? Really comes with the expertise, right? So when I think about the industry expert, I think of folks that have come ahead of me. I run a community within Microsoft, and I remember being just a community captain or community subject matter expert. So I was one
Mhm.
of the guys that knew how, Windows and all these other products work. Um, and I looked up to one guy who, all he did was blog. He blogged about, solutions and how it worked. And I was just like fascinated by his ability to continue to put out content, blog information. And, all I could think was, man, I can't wait to work with this guy. Right. He is somebody, if I had known back then, I would have certainly pulled him in because at that point it was all about building my brand. It would have been about him giving me input. What can I do differently?
Mhm.
And again, with all of these roles and responsibilities, you are still the decision maker. You are going to make that decision of how do I apply these scenarios into my life, into my branding, into my success, right? So, but that just gives you an example of some of the roles that we see within that space. So if you were to think a little bit broadly, Michael, what would you say would be maybe one or two other roles um, that you would fit in here? Because again, these roles are limitless. These are sort of the basic roles that we found.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is kind of like the flip side of the coin to me of the challenger. But I
Hmm.
think it's again going back to that iron on steel. I think that there's necessary friction that needs to take place. So somebody who is, I guess I would call them, and I think about a person who like literally changed my life, who was this person at one time, a trusted critic,
Hmm.
somebody who is has your best interests in mind, wants the best for you, but
Hmm.
is bold in not just challenging you to act boldly, but to bring about change, to call bullshit bullshit. Am I allowed to say this? I guess I
It's your
just did.
podcast, not
The
mine.
BS, the BS. There we go. I got
Yeah.
B. To call BS BS and to be able to say, look, this is where I see a problem, and is able to point those out, and because they are trusted,
Hmm.
you're able to receive it, that's a unique position to me.
No, that's good. And that's a good way to look at it, right? So an individual that basically helps you, um, you know, give you sort of a different view, but also trust that you can, this is what I, this is what people will think. However, you should, you know, maybe you should think differently as well. So again, what I try to do is I try to throw them into each of these different categories and ask that
Yeah.
question. Do they fit in any of these categories?
Well, that's what I think. I think there's a lot of different. We could get picayune, but I think these are great buckets, right? Upon
Yep.
which think you can start to plug in many others. So I think it's a good framework for that, for understanding.
Exactly. It's an amazing framework and a place to start. Really forces you to think outside the box.
Yep.
Um, so these are just some of the roles and responsibility. And the reason I think it's important to kind of think about these different scenarios is we tend to stay in what we consider a comfort zone. We're comfortable with what we know. We're comfortable with doing the same things over and over and over again because quite frankly, it works. But are you growing? Are you learning?
Yeah.
Are you exploring? Are you challenging yourself? Are you surrounding yourselves with people that help you be better and think differently? That's part of this whole thing. So I love this quote about JFK. Basically states, too often we enjoy the comfort opinion without the discomfort thought. Right? What that
Hmm.
means is, we're so used to surrounding ourselves with people that are like us, and as opposed to having people around us that are able to counterpoint and stimulate different thoughts, different ideas. What if you did? What if you did this way? What if you did it that way? Very similar to what you said, Mike, which is really just challenging people to step outside of their comfort zone. This is what the personal board of directors is intentionally trying to do. It's trying to help you be different, do different, be successful, build your career based on the influence of the people around you. And it just makes for a better story, makes for a better you.
Yeah, it's I think about when you talked about this the other day, and I know like a board is not our family because we're with them forever. But I think one of the consequences of a highly mobile society, at least this is my observation, is that too often, because we are much more mobile, like growing up, when I grew up, we had every Sunday was spaghetti day. And we went over my grandpa's, all the cousins, blah blah blah. I grew up in an Italian American family, and that was the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And but you had people of many different opinions, and they'd fight and like cats and dogs and point things out and yell. But it did provide sources of bringing light into people who'd call BS and do this and that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think not necessarily that's a board of directors, but I think the problem, what I've seen, is that in our highly mobile society, as we're now no longer in those units and stuff, we tend, in my observations, to congregate and associate and become isolated in these, those sound chambers or, little social bubbles of like-mindedness where we're
Yeah.
not getting that challenging and those other things. And I think that's part of what a board of directors needs to, obviously if we're talking career focus, but just in general, and like you said, being a better person, get us out of our comfort zone and out of our little bubbles, right? Because we do it even to online activities like social media.
No, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. That's what we do. And I think that's a great segue because now we need to really think about what it means to be successful,
Hmm.
especially with this whole remote work, not going into the office every day,
Yeah.
connecting on different platforms to communicate. The virtual aspect of it becomes another added. I've actually thought about saying, building your virtual personal board of directors, really, because that's what you're essentially having to do. We're no longer sitting in a boardroom. We're all sitting in a virtual boardroom now. So
Yeah.
what does that look like? Right. And one thing that I think that was interesting to you that kind of blew your mind is really once you identify these people that are part of your board of directors, some of them don't have anything to do with each other. And the truth is, they really shouldn't. They don't have to. because who are they most interested in? You, me, you, right? Really, your brand is what they're interested in. So that minute that they're meeting, they're talking about you. They're sharing information about you. And in the midst of that, what will happen is you'll also help them learn about who they are as individuals as well. You may change those individuals as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that personal board of directors is sort of the beginning process of connecting with the larger society, beginning process of, inviting the idea that not everybody thinks like me, not everybody does things like me, and really opening up that opportunity to build that learning environment. So I think moving forward, what I challenge the group to do, and I think you recall this, is
Mm-hmm.
ask a few questions. What are you after? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What is it that you need to go after? Is it money? Is it success? Is it popularity? Is it career, something you enjoy doing? You got to figure out what that is and make sure that you have that as the forefront reason for driving this initiative. And then once you've identified what that is that you're after, you have to ask yourself, what's holding you back? What's
Mm-hmm.
preventing you from getting there? What's creating the block, right? Is it mental? I've seen a lot of people go through mental. Is it, physical? Is it ailment? Like, what is it? Identify it, write it down, put it down on a piece of paper, on the computer, whatever. But know that those are your blockers and that you need to figure out people that will help you get past those blockers. Are you looking for a new job? And I work with a lot of people that are looking for new careers, new jobs. And sometimes it's just connecting with someone that can help them find those opportunities. Is it picking up the phone and calling that next person? Is it looking at that job career? Is it asking yourself, do I fit these categories? Do I need to fit these categories, right? So what's holding you back for applying for that next job, for getting that next role? If you're in a role today, where do you think your career is going? If you've been in that same role for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and now you want that change to happen, you have to ask that question. Where do I want to go? Where do I think it's going? And how do I change that direction? Right? So that goes back to, where would you like it to go? Do you want to be a director? Do you want to be a manager? Do you want to be a technical leader? Do you want to get more technical? Right? So those questions are things that your board members will help you uncover. So that leads to that last one. What do you need the board to help you with? And
Mm-hmm.
so when you come to those meetings, this is an agenda that you are sharing with your board. You're basically challenging them to help you be better at figuring out you. And that's where the board comes in. Now, does the board know every single thing about you? They can't.
No.
It's impossible, right? And so part of that learning, that communication, that meeting, that virtual session is for them to start learning who you are, and also giving you their biased or unbiased feedback about who you are as an individual and what you can do to better brand yourself. The individual that might be the industry expert might show you what he did to get there to be
Mm-hmm.
an industry expert. The critic might say, "Well, I don't know if you should go down that route. I've seen multiple people do that too," and it helps you think differently. So
Yep.
these are asks that I tend to bring up, and get people going. So I love it. I think it's a great way to start. So just to kind of review this, and I have this document because I think it's great because it actually
And
defines
quick
where we go with
question.
this.
Are we going to be able to provide the slides?
Sure, why not?
Okay. Awesome.
Sure, why not? I mean, I think
I know you have some worksheets with that and stuff, so yeah, that'd be great.
the worksheets are probably more important. Personally, I feel that the worksheets really give you a better story because at the end of the day, it's you're doing two things: either you're presenting it or you're actually doing the work. And so the
Right.
worksheet is where you tell that story. So it starts by defining what is a personal board of directors, and you can. I don't have to read the details, but you can see the important thing is that the relationship matters. Getting involved with the people that are going to help you be successful, and making sure that you're able to tell that story. And it tells you, the question, why even do this, right? but we already know that answer because you spent some time here doing it. And then in the worksheet, it talks about how to get started. What are the steps? Define your goals. Create that diversity, the different people. Find them on LinkedIn. Find them in your office. Find them in the old jobs you had. Find them through personal friends and
Hmm.
members that you've worked with. And then step three is just to take action. Be intentional. Be intentional. Be intentional. Right? It's not just an idea. It's not just a suggestion. It's a way to make sure that your brand becomes successful.
Yep.
That's what this is about. It's about you. So either way, I think I wanted to share that with you because it's important. We have this the spread worksheet that also walks you through it, identifying what your career goals, your focus areas are, and your time frame, and then also being able to identify big people based on different roles. What are the roles that they're going to play? You can add your own roles if you feel like they
Hmm.
need to be there. You can have your own role. Is there a limit to a number of board candidates that you can have? Well, we know that answer, right? Because we get that all the time. It just depends on what you're looking for, right? Um, and then lastly, you build your board of, come on, directors, and you identify people and you put them in different seats. So I'm going to pause there. Does that make sense? What we
Yeah,
just
no,
covered?
I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think the big thing is that intentional. Once you've done all this, is the act, right? That take
Hmm.
action. Where and that's what I remember. I when we were first talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and I said, "Wait a minute, so are you telling me you actually like schedule and have meetings with these people?" And you're like, "Yeah," and I was like,
That's the intentional part, right?
"Yeah."
It's supposed to be jarring. It's supposed to be if you're serious about building your career, if you're
Hmm.
serious about driving your success, especially now that everything's virtual, this is the way you do it. This is
Yep.
how you start. And happy to share this content with anybody, but I think it's a very powerful way to build your personality, build your drive, and to be intentional about your success. You know.
Now, are there any links to the book?
So a disclaimer, this personal board of directors is not uh, something that I own personally. It's something that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
I think I learned it about 7 or 8 years ago, talking with a friend of mine, and I was just fascinated by what it can do, and that's what got me going. And I've
Well,
done this
you've
in the.
certainly spent a lot of time thinking about this, working, and I mean, in your career, for those who don't know you, internally at Microsoft, extremely well thought of. Your personal brand inside of the company, I mean, it's strong. It's what do they say? The kung fu is, or no, the force is strong with this one,
Well, and that's a great example
right?
because here's even at that stance, there's still a lot of work I need to do to build my brand outside of the company. How do I grow my brand, so that when you see me on LinkedIn, you're like, oh, it's that guy. When you see me, on social media, you're like, yeah, I remember him. You know. So again, how do you get it to the next step? How do you take it to the next level? Do you want it to go there? You know.
Well, I think
So.
that's the important thing because what's important for somebody and their goals may be different, right? So you've done a
Hmm.
phenomenal job of building yourself internally. I think the awards and accolades you've gotten internally at Microsoft. I see Alfred's name all the time. Oh, it's Alfred. Yeah, yeah, okay, whatever. It's him again. But certainly that, I mean, this has a play in all that because you're able to position and focus on what's really important to get to those goals that you've set.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's important. I think so. Imagine how powerful we would be if more people were to do that. I mean, as a
Yeah.
society. So my challenge is to push people to do those things, get involved, get connected, you know. So
I think it's awesome. So if people are looking to learn more, we'll have the slides with those worksheets attached. Any other things that you would recommend to people to go read, go watch, look at?
I really don't have a lot of things to recommend. I think there's a lot, when you look at these slides, this content. There's a few books out there. Maybe we'll post it afterwards,
Okay.
as a reference point. But the worksheets. The most important thing I can say is to be technical. Be intentional.
Be
You know,
intentional. Yeah.
be intentional. Right. Get it
Yep.
done. And figure out how to just stay involved.
I
You know.
think, that just reminded me one last thing, and then I guess we'll go ahead and break. But on the be intentional, I think a lot of times we think we have to get it all figured out first. And I think what my experience has been with anything like this, because there's a lot of inertia that can build up and there's internal resistance that might not even be conscious that we have when we're doing things like this. I think to get at least a couple of those board members identified and let them know and get the process started, that gets you on a hook that it helps to keep things moving so you don't get stuck and then push it aside and then it never happens.
Yeah, that is what being intentional is. Get
Yeah.
it going. Get started.
Well, Alfred, this has been awesome. I'd rather be sitting in that little hut in back of you than in my chair. I've been watching the whole broadcast thinking, oh, I just want to be there. But no, this has been really
Me
great.
too.
And so,
Me
I want
too.
to thank you. You've done a great job in kind of communicating this internally at the company. I know you talk a lot about it. It is a
Hmm.
passion of yours. And we'll go ahead. We'll put the attach the slides. And if you have any books you want to shoot them my way or videos or whatever, we'll post that as well. But thank you again. And
Thank you,
for everybody who's tuned in, this is Mike and
Alfred.
did you
You
have
call
a
him
great
Doctor.
day? And and instead of ciao, I guess we'll say aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Have a great one, everyone.